Hey everybody. So I thought I would start this video by letting the cat out of the bag, which is that I am not in Japan anymore. I'm going to explain the reasons for that, the mechanics of that, later on in this video. But I guess for now, let me put myself somewhere where you can see me. I think this works, okay? But for now, we have a lot of stuff to talk about. So the good news is that the Olympics are over. The Paralympics are ongoing, and those are not over for a couple more weeks. But the Olympics are over, which means that even though it might not feel like it right now, I think the primary obstacle to students and workers and eventually tourists getting into Japan has passed. So that's the good news. The bad news, I mean, there's a lot of bad news, and I don't even know where to start with it. I guess when I was making my notes for this video, there was an article yesterday in Kyoto News that was talking about the fact that so many hotels and other hospitality establishments in Tokyo that were ostensibly built for the Olympics are going out of business right now. And what I found striking about this article is that it did not once mention the fact that Japan's border is closed. You know, it framed the issue as all these innkeepers and shopkeepers that were just so shocked that no foreigners had come back yet. They're like, why aren't foreigners coming back to Japan? There is no demand. And this lack of self-awareness, I can't help but wonder if that is part of what has frozen Japan in this closed border state. Because to look at a couple other examples of countries that have actually had more closed borders than Japan but are starting to wake up and smell the coffee, look at Australia and New Zealand the past couple weeks. Now, granted, they were awakened from their COVID-0 fantasy slumber by sudden outbreaks of Delta. But the reality is that even these countries with slammed shut borders are admitting that they're going to have to open at some point. You know, New Zealand saying that it is at least going to start accepting tourists from some countries in January of next year, which is a huge step, by the way, to go straight to tourists after having closed borders for what will be almost 2 years by that point. And then Australia, I think, is now to the point where, because their outbreak is so out of control, Scott Morrison, his ball's finally dropped. And he's basically saying that they're not going to let case numbers keep them down. Their opening is going to be based off hospitalizations and deaths and vaccine targets and nothing more. And, you know, here's the thing about Japan I think is frustrating. So if you guys follow Rochelle Kopp, I don't know how to pronounce her name, but you'll know who I'm talking about. Japan Intercult is her Twitter handle. She wrote an article, like, I guess in May, talking about how the lack of transparency in Japanese government decisions is actually a strategy. They want to hammer out and finalize everything behind closed doors and get it as close as possible to being error-proof before they make it public. And I'm summarizing this badly. Some of you will have read the article and you'll understand it a little bit better. But I can't help but wonder if it's a combination then of those things. It's partially that you know, Japanese people are just unaware of the reality of the situation, and probably a lot of government officials are too. And there's also this, I don't want to say secrecy, but it is kind of a secrecy element, because you can't imagine that it's a situation now in late 2021. I mean, I guess it's still middle 2021, but where countries like Australia and New Zealand that have been totally closed are contemplating opening within the next 6 months. And Japan just has no plan. I find it really difficult to believe that. Or another country, which again is going slower than I would probably like, but Singapore, which was a COVID-0 economy that's basically, you know, saying they're going to have to live with the virus. They just opened up a couple of reciprocal travel lanes this week. You know, it's very strange. And I guess on that note, what I find so interesting, and I've talked about this in some of my past videos, but Japan is not a COVID-0 country, right? It never has been. It's had over 1 million cases detected. Given how little Japan tests, there's probably been 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 times that. So probably looking at 10 to 50 million cases in Japan over the past year and a half. Most of those occurred after the borders were closed to all foreigners. And yet, in spite of the fact that Japan has not managed COVID well and is not a COVID zero economy, they have managed their border as if they are. And that's the other disconnect. I somehow wonder if the border isn't a point of pride for Japanese. Like, well, we had a lot of COVID, but at least we kept those dirty foreigners out. I mean, I'm sure it's not as crude, maybe, as that in their mind's eye. But I can't help but wonder if that's some of the reason. But I don't know, and that's, I guess, sort of the philosophy portion of this video. In terms of actual developments, I have to say it's pretty scant. So, you know, on the Japanese language sort of travel internet, there's a lot of articles and talk about the inbound revival. So in Nihongo, you say inboundo no saikai. If you search that on Japanese Google, because I think people in the tourism industry really want it to happen. They're anticipating it happening. But the only real concrete development that I would say has probably occurred the past 30 days. Actually, there's two. I think Davide, it's early in the morning here. Davide talked about this in his last video, but I think they are allowing some government-sponsored students in from September. And then there's also something that seems quite minor, but it could be the precursor to something bigger. I think now that the Olympics are done, they've raised the daily arrival caps. I think it was at like 2,000 per day, and now it's going to be 3,400. And then I think they said they're soon going to be expanding to 6,100, which again, compared to the number of people who used to arrive in Japan every day before the pandemic, that's almost nothing. But it's at least a step in the right direction. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I would say, unfortunately, there's not a lot of news. I mean, I guess the other piece beyond the Olympics and the Paralympics being finished, well, there's two other pieces. The first piece is the COVID situation, which, of course, is at its very worst in Japan, although based on when this wave started rising, and the fact that Delta waves seem to go up in about a month and a half and then down in about a month and a half, I think it has to be turning around soon. So that needs to resolve itself. And then, of course, attached to that, Japan's vaccine rollout, which has picked up in recent weeks and months, it needs to continue going apace so that hopefully everyone who wants a vaccine can be offered one by October or November. So those things are really, really important. But I don't know. I'm really flummoxed because then there's the election, of course, which I'm kind of confused about how the Japanese political system works, actually. So I guess the lower house has to be dissolved by the end of October. And then I guess there's a month that is allotted for campaigning. So the election has to be held by the end of November, November 26th, I think. But then some people in the LDP want to have it early, like in September, so that there's still somewhat of the high from the Olympics and Paralympics. And then it's before the cost counting really begins. I don't know when that's going to happen. Of course, that's a big issue too, because I don't think Suga is going to fling open the borders with an election coming up. You know, as much as that would probably engender support for him toward him, rather, I cannot fucking talk this morning, support toward him for the the tourism industry. I think general Japanese people don't want foreigners in their country because, of course, they perceive this as being a foreigner's disease, and it's disgusting. And I mean, I don't know. I don't know how Japan moves forward from this. Certainly not on a time scale of months. I do continue to believe that Japan will open at some point in 2022. I mean, generally open. But it's difficult to see any significant opening before at least 6 months from now and maybe longer. And that's really sad because I definitely didn't feel that way earlier this year. And but yeah, I guess now is probably a good time to talk about why I am not in Japan anymore and where I am. Of course, I'm in Paris, in case you didn't guess by the roofs and the general feel outside in this tiny, tiny little apartment. It's actually like in the top of one of the roofs of these buildings in Le Marais. And it's just an Airbnb. I'm just here visiting, but well, it's weird because after living in Japan, it doesn't seem so small, but I can't imagine a normal American person coming into this apartment. But yeah, so I actually left Japan on July 1st. So that last video that I made in that Akasaka hotel, I was actually getting ready to leave Japan. Now, there are a few reasons that I decided to leave Japan. I would say the first is that, I had only paid for 6 months of my course to begin. And so at the end of May, when they started harassing me to pay the next 6 months, I kind of went into a deep inquiry process within myself. And I loved a lot of things about being in Japan those 6 months. I loved, of course, studying Japanese, the ability to travel around Japan, the ability to sort of really immerse myself in the culture and the language in a way that I never could on any of my previous tourist trips. And I did like my school. I had a lot of great teachers. I had wonderful classmates. I made great friendships. But there was also the problem that anytime someone coughed in the school practically, they went virtual, and we would have to go to Zoom classes for weeks or months at a time, which, defeats the purpose of being in Japan. There was this weird, and those of you who've been to Japan in the past know people have always worn masks there. And I feel like the religious aspect of masking that has now taken over worldwide, because, masks don't stop the spread of viruses. They might look like they should, but the pores in a mask are about 50 to 100 times bigger than viral particles. So it's total theater. It's total talisman. It makes you feel better, but it doesn't do anything. Well, anyway, these talismans have been ubiquitous within Japan for a very long time. And I don't know. I feel like the weird thing about Japan, they have these closed borders. 100% of people are wearing masks, even outside, even at the top of a mountain, even in their own car, probably even in their own apartments when they're having sex. And yet they are doing nothing else to try to control the virus. And it was just maddening being there sometimes, seeing the ridiculousness of these pointless measures, and then seeing Japan totally ignoring anything that could help, namely vaccination, because that's really our only way out of this. Lockdowns also aren't especially effective, and I'm very glad the Japanese Constitution forbids those. But yeah, so that became really frustrating, and it started to actually make me very bitter and resentful. And of course, then there was a third piece, which I don't talk about my personal life a lot on here, but I actually found out that a very close family member of mine has cancer, and I wanted to at least be living in the United States while she's going through that. I obviously am still traveling, so I am in Paris right now. I'm going to be in Europe for the next 5 weeks on some personal and business stuff. I am headed to Switzerland next week, I guess this week now, it's Monday, to see my best friend who just had a baby a month ago. I'm here in Paris visiting a very good friend of mine who last came to see me in Thailand 3 years ago when I was living there. And then I'm going to Italy for a month because while Japan continues to be closed, I am actually going to pivot to Italy for a while. So those of you who follow my main website, Leave Your Daily Hell, might know that in addition to my Japan content on there, which is what inspired me to spin off Japan Starts Here into a separate site, a lot of my traffic and my travel planning services go towards Italy. And I haven't been to Italy since before the pandemic, and I really want to expand my content and therefore expand my service offerings for travelers to Italy and dig in really deep to the country. So I'm going to be there for like 3.5 weeks after I finish up in Switzerland, and just really digging in deep to places I've been, places I haven't been, foods and experiences and landscapes. And so, this video is for Japan Starts Here. I'm going to have Italy Starts Here in about 1 or 2 months, probably. I guess probably closer to 2, because I have to write the content, build the website. Yeah, bada bing, bada boom, and then it'll probably take another year to get ramped up into anything significant, because I have to build links, and then I have to search engine optimize, and then Google has to have a chance to index my content. All of which, though, is to say, because this is a video about Japan, I guess the one silver lining, and I hate to find silver linings in such a terrible situation. The one silver lining I would like to say for those of you who are not in Japan, and even those of you who are considering postponing or canceling your studies altogether, Japan is not itself right now. Okay? That's, I guess, my point. I was very thankful to have been there. I accomplished everything I wanted to. I can speak quite a bit of Japanese now, and I wouldn't trade my experience that I had for the world. But I also wasn't sad to leave. And I wasn't disappointed to leave, because what you are getting now, if you get into Japan, is this weird Frankenstein's monster approximation of the Japan experience. And I think that, like, for me personally, I can't wait to go back to Japan as a tourist after all this bullshit is over. Honestly, I think it's going to be so much more of a enjoyable experience. And even those of you who are studying and going to work, I mean, I think hopefully, I mean, again, Japan's behavior has not been based on logic or science this whole time, but I'm hoping that by the time the border is open to everybody again, things are more back to normal in Japan. I mean, I'm sure they'll be wearing masks for the next 100 years, but in terms of the pandemic itself and maybe people's behavior going more back to normal and not having to go to virtual school every time someone coughs, or virtual work, and be constantly bombarded with all this crisis talk. I just think that if you have to wait a little bit longer to do that, that's not a horrible thing. And those of you who are thinking of abandoning your studies in Japan, fuck Japan. Go study in Korea. Go study in some other country. And again, come back to Japan as a tourist and enjoy it. Enjoy Japan when it's free again, because I guess that's the thing. You don't really feel very free there right now. And yeah. So anyway, yeah, I don't know. I wish this video had more. I wish I had as specific an idea of what I thought was going to happen now as I did earlier in the year. But unfortunately, just both with the way pandemic has gone, as well as the sort of unresponsiveness and inertia of the Japanese government, I'm just really not as sure anymore. So the good news is I won't make you wait another month and a half for the next video. I don't think it's going to be September 1st, because nothing's going to change until then, but it'll be probably sometime in the middle to end of September. And I don't know. I mean, I guess to leave you on a hopeful note, let's just remember that it was around October 1st of last year that the initial global residence and business tracks were announced. And, you know, I don't know if there's anything special about the month of October, but I guess theoretically, you know, that could happen again this year. Who knows? But I certainly hope the situation has changed a little bit by the next time I get back to you. Anyway, thanks so much for watching again this month. I will see you next month, and let me know in the comments if you have any questions, okay? Bye.